So my name is Keroles. I'm an ND student, and I'm doing my PhD here at Concordia. And my role in the Compost Project is to have, it's essentially just coordinate and make sure people can come together and have a comprehensive proposals that we can put in front of the CCSL for the Big Hairy Idea competition. And my role was part of being the Graduate Individualized Student Association, and then we are collaborating with Loyola Sustainability Research Center, that's the faculty side, and EHS was Environment, Health, and Safety, so sort of the service community side. And we also are collaborating with CSU, Concordia Student Union, so that's the undergraduate side. JISA, my association, represents sort of the graduate side. So yeah.
Great. So could you explain what the Compost Project is?
Yes, so the way we see it is that there are three different actions that need to happen in parallel. Two of them are related to the infrastructure side, and one of them is on the social side. And we think that the two go hand in hand. You cannot do one without the other. So in the infrastructure side, we think what we're missing is to have a composter more within reach. So right now, Concordia composts about 26% of what can be composted of the waste that's generated at Concordia. However, most of it essentially gets sent to Ottawa for the composting facility there. So I think that's sort of counterintuitive. If you want to compost for greenhouse effects, to reduce greenhouse effects, you probably shouldn't ship stuff to Ottawa. And then the second aspect of the infrastructure is to have the compost bin more widespread at Concordia. So right now you can find them in a very, very few places, or you can request them for an event. And we think, part of the reason people don't compost so much in Concordia is that it's not very convenient. However, even in the places where there are compost bins, it's still not working very well, just because people don't know what to throw in the compost. So they would either throw compostable waste in the landfill bin, or they would throw landfill waste into the compost bins, and then it becomes very contaminated. And contaminated compost bins are not very useful, because then the compost is being produced at the end is not high quality, so it essentially goes to waste, or the composting company would not accept it. So there's a social aspect to it, which is an educational campaign, which is what we are sort of running as student groups and faculty. The infrastructure side is we have a commitment from the service community, from EHS, and we also had a strong support letter from Roger Cote, the VP Services here, to invest in compost and better triaging, which is essentially more widespread compost bins, and finding different models to have composters more within reach. So yeah.
Wonderful. So could you talk about the mission of your organization, or the project, I guess?
So yeah, so the idea is to have a complete compost cycle at Concordia. We think is that in terms of waste management, if you compare different universities, Concordia have a relatively good record. If you compare to McGill's, they don't have a goal in terms of where they want their waste management to be in terms of how much of it gets recycled. But if you compare it to other universities like Sherbrooke actually managed to recycle around 90% of their waste. And a big reason for that is that they control the input stream, I guess, which is how much of the material going in is compostable in first place, and then they have a strong compost program around it. So they got to 90%. Concordia is around 40%. So my goal is, well, let's beat Sherbrooke. Yeah.
Wonderful. So could you talk about the structure of your organization? And it would be great if we could break this down into 3 different structure divisions. So maybe you could talk about the board of governors or the decision makers of your organization.
Right. So the main applicant for the Compost Project is my association, which is called JISA, which stands for Graduate Individualized Student Association. And we have some sort of a board of governors. We have 3 execs, the president, which is me, and the treasurer and communication officer. We also have 2 ex officio members, which is a program director and a program coordinator. And I think one of the reasons we're very successful and able to survive with a very small budget is that we work very closely with the program. So we have the coordinator and program director as ex officio members, so it keeps them in the loop for all our meetings. They don't necessarily always show up to our meetings, but we have our common meetings, but we keep them invited. And also in terms of funding, we have matching funding between the GSA allocation, and then the program would match this funding so that everybody has a stake in the organization. However, so this is the main applicant, and then I mentioned my other collaborators. So we have CSU to represent the undergraduate side, as well as LSRC from the faculty and EHNS from the service community. I don't know if that answers your questions. Okay.
Wonderful. Could you also talk about the division of labor? So, like, do you have paid employees, volunteers? What types of labor?
Right. So one of the things we mentioned in CCCL application is that we have some places where we would give honorarium, but we insisted that none of it would actually go to the applicant. So we wanted to have an open process of having a call out. Everybody gets properly evaluated, and then we choose those positions. But we try to avoid having any of them as the main applicants in JISA or CSU. Now we have two paid positions, which is the project coordinator and graphic designer. So we also are counting a lot on volunteers. So one of our goals is to have 100 volunteers. Some of it will go to our activities and events to help us set up and all these things, but we think that the best way to communicate is in person. So if there's a person that's standing next to the new compost bins and then people would throw their waste, that person would step in and sort of explain what the new bin is for, not necessarily as part of an event. So depending on how many new compost bins there are, we would need a lot of volunteers to be able to do that effectively. So that's sort of on the student side. And one of the things I should mention is that we're committed to make sure that all our student volunteers are recognized in the Concordia co-curricular record, which is essentially a transcript of all your volunteer and extracurricular activity, and it's validated by the university. So you can always sort of showcase that. And it's important for the student to showcase their work, but it's also important for us to document how much work goes into the campaign so that it can be replicated for years to come. So it shouldn't be just a one push event kind of thing. It should be sort of a robust, persistent campaign that goes for multiple years. And then we're also asking for volunteers from faculty and staff with different roles. Obviously, I'm not going to try to have a faculty stand next to the bin, but more if you would say a couple of words in the beginning of class, or even allow a volunteer to say a couple of words in the beginning of class, or depending on the kind of course you would teach, maybe they would incorporate it into the practical side of the course. So let's say there's a course called Impact of Technology and Engineering, and students would sort of do a critical review of a social problem and how engineering can sort of address that in tandem with the social solutions. And I think compost would be a good topic on that. So that could be one of the suggested topics by the faculty to the students. That way you have sort of a long-lasting effect. And then from staff, what we would ask is to have a sign on the desk so that when you communicate with students or even your colleagues, that message of compost will come across, because it's not just the students that throw garbage, it's everybody, it's faculty, it's staff, it's administration. And all it takes is one uninformed person throwing the wrong waste in the wrong bin. So, yeah.
Could you talk about the economic model? So maybe talk about how you get funding, if you make money out of the project, and what kind of expenses you would have.
Okay, okay, which one are we talking about, JISA or the project now?
So talk about the project.
Okay, so the project itself is mainly funding from the Big Hairy Idea competition, and it's essentially it was a big one-time competition that the Concordia Council of Student Life CCCL has organized, sort of to use extra funds that they had, and they used a different model where they said instead of partially funding as many projects as possible, we want to select very few projects and we fund them very well. So the project estimated cost, as you were looking at, is somewhere between $10,000 to $45,000. So ours got funding for $35,000 from CCSL, and we're looking at other sources of funding, particularly SAF and perhaps GSA and CSU could sort of chip in a little bit more. Part of it is the monetary value, but also the other part is to demonstrate that the community is fully engaged behind this project, which is necessary to keep pressure on the decision making, saying that the community wants this and they're willing to put their money where their mouth is. So, we would need concrete action going forward in terms of compost infrastructure as well as the social side.
Great. Could you recount the history of how your organization was founded? So how did it start and how did it become what it is today?
Right. So I used to sit in the Concordia Senate before. I sat there for a couple months. It wasn't very long, but there was a point that was made by an undergraduate student called Jessie or Jessica. Sorry, I'm gonna repeat this. I'm just gonna call Jess. I think that's a short for something, but I'm not sure what it is. Okay. So I'm going to start over. So I used to sit in Concordia Senate a couple of years ago. It was only for a couple of months. It wasn't for very long. And there was a point that was made by an undergraduate student, her name was Jess, that we had compost or biodegradable cups in Senate, but there wasn't a compost bin. So she pointed that out. And it immediately came to me that there was a model that was done in the whole building where we had compost bins in essentially most of the floors in the whole building. And that was only done in the whole building. It wasn't done in any other Concordia buildings. And then I also mentioned that Loyola also had a composter that's on site. So the only thing that's preventing us from having a self-sustained or a self-sufficient cycle, complete compost cycle at Concordia, is essentially generalizing that whole building all across the campus. And then you have the Loyola composter taking care of the whole thing, and then you have the city farm and the greenhouse taking care of that compost and using it for producing food to the community. So I talked to a few people after that, particularly Roger Clote, and he seemed to give me some positive responses, except we never really had or at least I never had a concrete plan going forward. It was more just a conversation. Anyway, so last year I was sitting in CCSL as the GSA representative, and I got to learn about the upcoming BHI project, the Big Hairy Idea project. And I thought, well, that's something I can put on the table and see if we can have a collaboration so that I can bring something to the table and they can bring something to the table, and then we can move forward. So I had an initial sort of project that was a little silly. I got to learn that the Loyola composter was not working. It was sort of broken, which was a bummer. And also I got to learn that the whole building was scaled back. So now compost bins are on only a few places. And with some research and conversation with different people, I got to learn that, well, now we're sending compost to Ottawa. So it seems that we're going in the opposite direction. So I thought, well, okay, maybe we can fix the composter with the Big Hairy Idea money. In return, the administration could make the bins more widespread across the university, and essentially they would take care of the operation because that's another cost. So that's sort of my thought process. And then we had a meeting with Roger, and Peter Stewart, who's the director of Loyola Sustainability Research Center, was very supportive, and he helped me organize the meeting, and he came with me. And essentially the response that we got is that we shouldn't worry about the infrastructure and we shouldn't pay with student money, so you can take care of it. What they needed really help was the educational side, because they said, well, the campaigns that we had a lot of contamination, and that wasn't very useful. So he said, essentially, don't worry about the infrastructure. It's not a question of whether or not we will do it. It's a question of how, and we can sort of work together on that. What we need help is the educational side. So we put that proposal together that we have the commitment from them on the infrastructure side, and then we can help with the educational side. And then we presented that to CCSL. And I have to thank Professor Stewart. He really helped me a lot with writing the proposal. It was very nice, and I got a lot of compliments on it. And I wasn't the one who made it that beautiful. But yeah, and CCSL gave us $35,000, and we're on our way now for our campaign.
Great. So could you talk about some of the events and activities that your organization has put together or that we'll be putting together in the future?
Yeah, so our biggest event is a food festival of sorts, and it's modeled after the Present Back to School event that they do every semester, and essentially it's like the lobby of the AV building full of food, and then students on their way to class, they would pick up a snack. And in the Present Back to School event, they get to talk to the administration. In my event, it would be more of having a volunteer in the compost bins there, and we have the signs, and then the volunteer would tell the students on their way to class what the new bins are for, and that they can throw just throw the leftover food or the core of the apple, for example, in the compost bins, and that way in less than 30 seconds they would just get the idea and go on their way to class. And we're hoping to be in as many buildings in as much time as possible. So we'll be in AV, MB, and Loyola will be in the SB or outside the chapel. So that's the main event, and actually part of it is also showcase the different food initiatives around campus. So hopefully we'll be able to showcase the Hive, for example, the Frigobert, or the greenhouse, and also showcase food-related food-related research and sustainability-related research. So perhaps we can have a booth of I don't know, food preservation research in the food festival. So it should showcase more than just the compost, but the compost is sort of the overall scene. And then the other side that we're trying to do is a sort of social media campaign. Again, I'm using different examples of what has been done before. So last year, Concordia did a campaign on Twitter around exam time sort of to relieve the stress, and you would have I don't know, a professor carrying a sign saying "Keep calm and study hard," something along those lines. So we want to do something similar with the role models of the university, whether it's students, faculty, or staff or administration, sort of carrying a sign and encouraging people to compost. The last part is we're hoping to do is sort of a comedy just for laughs skits where I'm not entirely sure how this is going to work out, but you would have a comedian sort of standing next to the bin, or would have a just for laugh prank around the compost bin, so that when somebody would throw their waste, they would get pranked, and then the person would learn because they just got pranked. But then we would also be able to film it and showcase it on different Concordia screen or YouTube videos, so that sort of without necessarily having the person watching know that they're being taught something. It's just for entertainment, but they still get the information, sort of engage them and give them some sort of an experience there. So those are the main things. Obviously, as I mentioned, that we do need a lot of volunteers. So we have our website, which is concordia-nd.net/compost, and you can find the links for students, staff, or faculty to sort of tell us and sign up to volunteer. And you'll see the different actions that you can contribute with, and you can choose what you want and what you don't want to do. And you can leave comments if you want. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Could you talk about the long-term and short-term goals of the Compost Project?
Yeah, so we're trying to figure out different ways to measure the impact of the project. Obviously, sort of the hard, solid numbers would be comparing waste audits that Concordia does every couple of years. So we have the last one was 2014, 2015, which is where I got my numbers from. Hopefully, we'll do one after, or HS would do one after, and see if there's any improvement after, but part of it will be just because there's more compost bins. So what we also need to do is sort of survey students, see how much they know about compost, and see if the campaign has contributed to that at all. And obviously, one of the issues that I guess many sustainability projects sort of face is sustainability in terms of how sustainable is the project every year. Can you sort of replicate it? Because I can't imagine we'd have 35,000 from CCL every year to do this, and no matter how robust one campaign can be, it will not be very successful if you sort of not remind people over and over again. So one of the things that I need to figure out is sort of a sustainable source of funding and a sustainable source of leadership. Funding is solvable. We can sort of put in GSA campaign budget and CSU campaign budget, but it's the leadership that's sort of important to make sure it's sustainable, because I guess it's a common issue with student association or student groups is that you have one good student that's there for a couple of years, and then after that the student will leave, and then this vacuum there, which I guess doesn't really happen as often with institutional memory. But yeah.
Wonderful.
I don't know if I answered your question.
That's great. What kind of partnerships does the Compost Project presently have?
So what I mentioned already is Loyola Sustainability Research Center and CSU and EHNS. So those are the main applicants. But one of the things that we want really to do is to be in as many places in as much time as possible. And one way to do this is not to have all the events funded by us, but also tap into the other events. So one of the suggestions was Pike Me Week, which essentially all around food, but we can also make sure that the compost team is sort of prominent there. But more importantly, I think is student and university orientation events. So where you have CSU, GSA, ASFA, FASA, CASA, ECA, and there's the university orientation. I think is START, right? And this is the second one that I don't remember. Essentially, if you can make sure that what's being offered there is sustainable, that's one thing. But also make sure that those events have compost bins there and proper waste management sort of procedure in place. And then we can make sure that we have volunteers there from our campaign to be in those events where they serve food. And then what we're hoping is that, because it's, you do it once, it's still a drop in a bucket, but we're hoping this will be sort of like a drop of ink, which changed the culture and changed the whole color of the bucket in a way. So, if you can put the procedure in place for one time and make sure that's in a sort of ways that has institutional memory, so maybe the next orientation would not need our campaign to do it, but their orientation will still be sustainable and will still have compost in it, and will still have volunteers who tell people how to use compost, particularly new students, how to use compost. So those are the partnerships we're looking at, and it's a monumental task to try to coordinate all those students' associations, but it's something we're really, focused on and hoping to do.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
What are some of the strengths of the organization?
I think our the collaboration is a strength, because again, it's very difficult to do things if you're one person, and usually that's the way it's done. But I think it's a collaboration between students and administration and faculty. I think one of the points that I really wanted to make is that we can work together in a way. We don't always have to bicker. We'll always bicker, right? But it's just we can find places where we agree and can sort of move things forward. And I think the fact that we're collaborating with people with different sort of access to resources, so whether it's faculty or administration or students, we all have our strengths, and we have different resources that we have access to, and just putting all that together in a way. Because for students, we have bigger access to volunteers, we have access to a lot of energy and enthusiasm, but some people would have access to money or some things of this sort. So I think it's, again, diversity and collaboration is our strengths.
What do you think the weaknesses of your project would be?
Institutional memory. So I want to be able to, as I mentioned, I want to be able to do this every year. But I'm not going to be here every year, right? And so I need to find a sustainable source of leadership in a way, and also a sustainable source of funding. But I think that's less of a problem than a sustainable source of leadership. Institutional memory, I think, is a problem. And it would be particularly helpful if there's a way where we can consolidate all our efforts, because there are quite a lot of food initiatives happening all across the university, and student initiatives, not just food ones. And being able to coordinate and work together would sort of give everything a bigger impact. So, I mean, grassroots is very important to make sure that things start moving very quickly. But there has to be a point where you start consolidating and then have more grassroots coming up. So there's always that cycle. Yeah, I think.
For sure, definitely. That's actually why we're doing this right now. Oops, sorry. I just bumped the camera. Okay, so what do you think your project brings to the Concordia community?
I think a conversation, an important conversation, because we sort of assume, we see the different recycling bins all over the place, and we actually do very well with some of it. For example, paper recycling is very we do that very well in terms of percentages and how much of paper we recycle that can't be recycled. We do very well. But that's mainly because it's very easy to recognize what's paper and what's not. If you look at the metal and glass, even though it's convenient, it's everywhere, it's not as good. But it's still much better than compost because it's still very convenient to do. But you see this and sort of assume, okay, well, we are doing very well already. Where we have few LEED certified buildings, we have some very good recycling, and we're compared to other universities, we're doing very well. And I think might be doing well, but we're not as good as we should be. So one of the things that happened last year or the year before, we've become one of the Future Earth 5 hubs, right? And nobody really understood what that means, except my understanding is that there's a big project, and one of those places where this project is going to be is Concordia, right? But I think being one of the 5 hubs should mean we're the mecca of sustainability somehow. We should be one of the top 5 sustainable universities on the planet, but we're not. I think we should aim to get there. Yeah.
Great. So how can people get involved with your organization?
Yes, so concordia-nd.net/compost, you sign up to volunteer, whether you're a student, faculty, or staff. We have something for you to do. So you should sign up. Or you can email us at GISA, so that's GISA, at concordia.ca, and I'll make sure that I find something for you to do. So, just shoot me an email or sign up. That'd be nice. And you can join our Facebook page. It's Waste Not, Want Not Compost Campaign, and you should be able to find it.
Wonderful. So you've answered my last question too. Well, if you want to, you could, but I know this is quite a new project, so you might not have one, but we asked people to recount either a personal story or anecdote about your organization. I don't know if you have any.
Well, so I liked the way that this project started from just a simple point that somebody made in Senate, and it sort of had a snowball effect to have a bigger project. Now, I don't know how successful the project will be, or if it will have other snowball effects, but I think the important thing is that being a student shouldn't intimidate you of making good points, even if it's in a big context where you might feel intimidated. I think to me that's the main point. That student can make a positive difference that sort of lasts. So yeah.
Great. I have 2 more questions. They're more kind of like overarching, not necessarily just about the organization. If you want to answer them, you could.
Of course.
One of them is, what would you think an ideal model for food services would look like at Concordia?
Wow. I don't know. I think one of the misunderstanding of sustainability is that people just think of the environment, and that's indeed a very big part of it. But sustainability is also sort of an overlap between environment and social and economic sides. So it's not just that you provide healthy food that you can put in a compost bins afterwards without some ingredients that you cannot pronounce, but it's also making sure that the people providing the food are local, for example, or treated well. So I think we need to make sure that when we think of sustainability, we also think about the social and the economic side. So I think that also should be the case when we choose our suppliers. So as I mentioned, when I mentioned Sherbrooke as an example, I don't know all the details and I don't know their suppliers, but one of the things that they control is what goes into the university is compostable. That's one thing, but I think we can also control that they treat their employees well, for example. Yeah.
Great. And what would you recommend, or what advice would you give to somebody who wanted to get involved with this food movement for the first time at Concordia? I don't know if
I think you need to keep your eyes open and look around. To me, I'm quite new to the sustainability movement. To me, I just don't like people being wasteful, and I'm probably very guilty of that. But it's if you keep your eyes open and just look at what's around you, you'll find many different things that you can learn from. So just go and try to learn something new, and then if you feel passionate about it, you should just ask, how can I get involved? How can I get engaged? And if you just have a random idea that doesn't fit with anything, you can talk to people to find ways to fund it, or find other teammates that can help you make it happen. But you shouldn't just leave ideas in your head, because there are so many ideas in people's head, but it's only useful if you start acting on it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Is there anything that you wanted to say that we haven't covered?
No, just join us and volunteer.